Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is that you're tuning in, thank you for stopping by. This is the Martell Group Fireside Chats, where each week we sit down with an industry expert and get their unique perspective on the world through the lens that we all know is sales and marketing. Today we sit down with Melaney Lubey, a sales leader, DEI advocate, mother of two, dog mom, and honestly, an absolute blast to talk to. Now, oftentimes on these podcasts, the guests and I like to exchange a list of topics that we want to cover or even subjects that we just want to dive into, but on this one, we kind of threw everything out the window, and Mel and I really just decided to talk about things that really excite us. So have a listen.
It's EQ. Like at the end of the day, I think a lot of it's like you're getting outside of your bubble. I would argue that sales isn't necessarily about who that person is. It's how you're interacting with people.
Bingo.
Right? Like nobody cares who I am, but it's how you feel when you're interacting with that person and how that person creates space for you to share your pain points. So much of sales, honestly, I think is like knowing when not to talk.
Like, you're not wrong.
Right?
Yeah.
So I don't know, it's not just sales. It's like how we engage, like knowing not to talk is like a fundamental human skill.
Now that's just one small taste of the ever exciting conversation that Mel and I had. Without further ado, let's hop right on into it. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Martell Group Fireside Chats. Wherever you are listening, whatever platform you are listening on, I'm so glad that you're here. I am so excited to have you on for yet another exciting episode. I know I'm biased. I say that every time, but you know what? We're just going to live life like that. That's how it's going to be. So I'm excited to welcome our guest today. We're going to switch some things up just a little bit like we normally do. We're going to go and dive more into kind of the sales side on today's. I know the past couple ones we've talked to more marketing specialists and things of that nature. But, you know, this is a sales and marketing podcast. So without further ado, I would love to welcome Miss Melaney Lubey to the podcast. I'm super excited to have her on today. She's a sales leader, a DEI advocate, a mom of two, somebody who's a people connector. There's a lot of these things that I'm just reading off of LinkedIn. But from the time that we've already spent together, Mel, like that's completely true about you. And honestly, I found before I even let you introduce yourself, I want to call this out because I thought this was hilarious. And I feel like you and I are very similar in this regard. You have something on your LinkedIn profile that said that a friend gave you a t-shirt that says you're easily excitable and you cuss too much. And my God, if that's not me as well, I think that's hilarious. So anyways, let's welcome Mel to the podcast. Mel, it's so good to have you here.
Awesome, Chris. It's nice to be here. Thanks for reaching out. I'm glad we got connected. And I love that you read my LinkedIn bio because that is like, it's a little like Easter egg maybe that I leave because I think I do a lot of things that make me laugh. And it's also really true. And so generally, as like someone that is in sales, I can always know it when someone's done the research about me. Because they'll if they reference something from that, which is like very visible in the universe, it tells me that they've actually like looked at me at all versus doing like broad outreach. So it's something I will always respond to emails when somebody mentions something to that, even if I can't help them or can't or if I'm not interested in their product. But I do that both because it makes me laugh and also it's a good way to weed people out.
It's I always find things like that really interesting because like it tells me about you, right? It tells me about who you are and it gives me at least a little bit of an idea of your personality. Like I could read that even if I hadn't met you before this, I could read that and say, okay, this person is probably more of an outgoing, charismatic person, which I think is absolutely true of you. But you can also kind of tell that like that was almost purposefully planted there for that reason you just said, right? For somebody to do their research and you kind of know, okay, if you're getting a cold email or somebody's out, reaching out to you just out of the blue and they mention that, then they've at least done a little bit of research to understand who you are or read about your position or who you represent or whatever the case is, for whatever they're calling about.
I think it's because not only is it fair because LinkedIn is a really strange place. It's like the professional version of yourself, but I also, for me, everything is based in like authenticity and like real connection. Everything I've done for the last 20 years is always kind of centered. finds its way centered to that. And so it is like it was my professional way of being authentic to who I am, which is like I
Yeah.
probably cuss too much. I don't cuss with clients typically, but like I always I cuss with my team. They know when I'm impassioned. I apologize for cussing probably on every single one-on-one I have with them. And then but you know, like I'm impassioned, I get excited. And it helps to weed people out professionally and personally. Like even when, you know, recruiters are reaching out to you or business opportunities, all of those things, I find that it's like, this is at least an element of who I am. It's like the surface level who I am. If we're not cool with that, then like, you know,
Yeah.
keep scrolling.
Yeah. We'll find maybe somebody else to hook you up with, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's also like, I think we have to like that sense of having some play and fun in what we're doing sometimes gets missed in a place like LinkedIn where it's like,
Yeah.
let's, you know, I think I end it with like my favorite food is cheese because it is, but it's like just something simple. Like my professional accomplishments are cool and whatever, you can look at those, but like, you don't know anything about the person based on where they've worked, in my opinion, anyway.
Yeah, you're right. LinkedIn is very much like a professional side of your persona or who you are, or your brand in some instances, right? Because you have like professional contractors or you know, like I'm seeing a lot more like influencers, content creators, people of that nature pop up on LinkedIn more and more, and their personality is who they are. That's their business. But like even if you're somebody who works like a typical 9 to 5, let's call it. You work for the man, if you will, right? Interjecting that personality, I don't see that as a bad thing at all, because it allows somebody to get to know you like slightly outside of the professional scope that LinkedIn offers. Plus, like it just, in my opinion, it makes them more of like an approachable person. Right? If you see that there's somebody who's interjecting a little bit of their personality or even sharing some of their personal life in a professional space, if you will, like that's just somebody who's easier to talk to, easier to approach, because you already know a little bit about them and can kind of relate in some ways.
It's interesting that you say that. Like, I love also, by the way, that we're already off the rails.
This is what I love about this podcast.
This is what's super fun, because I don't know that either of us are planning on talking about this, but I think it's that idea of like authenticity, and there's an aspect of vulnerability in that. But at the end of the day, people don't want to do business with businesses. They want to do business with people. I think about like every company I've ever worked at, it's like you're building teams with people that you respect, that you love, that you enjoy working with. When you're doing business, like we're in a capitalist society. Like the goal is to be productive and make money. But if you don't like that person, it's really hard to have hard conversations with them sometimes. And so I think remembering at the end of the day that we're all people and allowing, and it's like a small sense of vulnerability of like, this is an aspect of who I am. Maybe show me something about yourself. I think those are my favorite things about work and life in general, is like understanding nuances about people, understanding their backgrounds or their favorite thing. Or I recently asked my entire team a question on our stand-up on Monday, which was like, tell me a memory that you have of fourth grade. And it was based on this random article I was reading to my kid at night. It was... And I wasn't meant to be team building. I was just curious to test the theory of this article, which the basis of this article was like, what you remember about fourth grade is something that starts to really impact you in adulthood. It's like your sense of self is forming differently. It's their theory. And I'm still on the fence about it. And I wish I could remember the author of the article. But basically the theory was that like in fourth grade is when we start to understand that we are oftentimes like unique. And we're not necessarily like everybody else. And so that can be really positive.
Right.
And that can also be really negative. And so, but what ended up happening is I was like, just, hey, y'all, like, hear me out. I'm just curious to know this. Like, I want to see if this theory resonates. And the stories that came about from this very diverse group of individuals and professionals, like across the country, were incredible. Like, you know, we learned, like about, you know, people getting in trouble in school or sports experiences or like silly memories. And it wasn't like why, I wouldn't say like I was like, oh, it shifted my perspective on anybody, but it was just so fun to understand those things about them. And it was a question, like their memories that we would have never like I would have never known that about that person. And it helps to humanize us all, especially when we're having conversations, or even when you're understanding like what makes someone tick and how to help them make sure, how to, as like a leader, how do you make sure that they're performing at their best? And it, you know, and when they're not, like, how do we make sure that we're coaching them in a way that makes sense for them? So,
yeah. And I think too, you know, I think about both sides of that, right? Because, you know, there's like a leadership aspect to that for all the reasons you just stated, right? You can kind of help people along. You can understand a little bit more about them. But from like the person's perspective, right? Maybe they have never had the opportunity to tell that story, or they've never been asked that question and been able to open up to a group of their peers like that, right? So it not only, you know, helps you understand more about them, but it helps them feel like they're more, this is going to sound wicked cliche, but it makes them feel a little bit more at home within their team, right? Which then, you know, snowballs. It gives them more confidence on who they're working with. It gives them, you know, a sense of worth in some of the work that they're doing. Like, it just, there's like a combination of all of those things that happen after something so simple as sharing a story from fourth grade. Now, to be honest, I was the person who was also getting in trouble in fourth grade, but I also have some good, you know, I think I have some stories from fourth grade.
Okay. So now let me turn it on you. Like, tell me the first memory that comes to mind, like from fourth grade.
So fourth grade, I remember having to do a history report. I think we were studying like the American Revolution, or like just after the American Revolution. It was like like we were studying like prominent figures like in America, which is timely because we're coming up on the 4th of July. But I'm pretty sure like we all had to do reports, like pick a specific figure and do a report on it. And so I chose Thomas Jefferson. And so like I did this report about Thomas Jefferson, and I had to put together like who he was, what his accomplishments are. And you kind of had to like act as if you were that person. But my mom, I love what my mother did for me all throughout grade school. It was like, you know, she would go above and beyond to help do like projects or put things together, like the shoebox diorama, the whole 9 yards, right? But instead of just saying, oh, I'm going to be Thomas Jefferson and I'm going to read what he did, my mom made a wig. We got a hat. I had a whole costume. And I showed up that day, embarrassed as all hell, to be dressed as like Thomas Jefferson in a class of my peers in fourth grade who no one else had dressed up. Did my report, did the whole 9 yards in front of the class. And then I think I ended up getting like the highest grade in the class because like I had the costume, I did the report, we did everything just kind of like to the nines, ready to go. And that like you're talking about fourth grade. That's the first memory that popped into my head was like, yeah, I did dress up as Thomas Jefferson and do that whole report in front of, you know, like 30 kids at the time in, you know, little old small town New Jersey.
Okay, so maybe this is right, because I feel like that tells me not only something about you, but also like it's indicative of a little bit who you are as an adult. Like, you're certainly outgoing. You're not afraid to put yourself out there. Like, I don't know. I think it's, and also what an awesome, like the visual that I was getting, like you did something like that little me made you uncomfortable, but like, and you still did it anyway, which I think is like shows a little bit of bravery too. And like the hell with it. Like, I'm just going to do this thing. So I think it's really, I think that's a super cool example. Do you want to know mine?
Go for it. Please do.
Okay. So my memories of fourth grade, and I've long before I even read this article, these are the two things that I've always remembered about that year. Like, when my kids have asked me, it's one, I remember like the stickers on my desk. It was one of the first years our teacher let us like decorate our name placard on our desk. So this is going to age me, but it was Dan Cortez from MTV and Pauly Shore. Like, wow. I loved Pauly Shore. And so I remember like vividly like cutting these out and I'm sure there was some fashion on there, but it was like Dan Cortez and Pauly Shore. I remember that being on my name placard. And then the other memory, which is what made me giggle when you were sharing yours, was we also had to do these history reports. And so I'm from Kansas, and Amelia Earhart from not far from where I grew up. So my team, our group, chose Amelia Earhart. And so we had this grand idea of not doing a report, but we put on a play. I remember this. I wonder where Becca is, but Becca looked like Amelia Earhart. She had kind of the page boy haircut and the bomber jacket, because bomber jackets were super cool back then. And like I wrote the entire play and produced the entire play. And
I love that.
really fun and also like a stressful situation as a young person was like, but I learned a lot about myself in that
Hmm.
experience. And then when I read this article and I was like, oh shit, that's really interesting. Like those are my memories of that time. And as a grown up, I was a project manager, program manager. You know, I'm an organizer. I'm a ruckus organizer sometimes. And so it like that idea of like, oh, some of those like early indications where people are like, oh, that was a really cool thing that you did gave me, I think maybe inadvertently a little bit of the confidence to like
Hmm.
just try shit. Like I've spent a
Yeah.
lot of my career just saying like, ah, fuck it. I hope that's okay to cuss, sorry, Martel, but like I'm just gonna figure it out. Like I don't
Yeah.
really know what this is, but I'm gonna figure it out. So
It's
anyway.
really interesting too as you start drawing those parallels. Like I'm now thinking of more memories from that, and a lot of I always attribute, and I've always attributed a lot of my career path or my, like, let's call it success or whatever you want to call it. I always stem it
Yeah.
from high school, because a lot of where I ended up throughout high school, throughout college, a lot of my opportunities and stuff like that. I didn't go to college to be in sales or to do anything
Mhm.
specifically, but I did a lot of music throughout those time periods. But all of that
Cool.
actually started back in fourth grade. And I actually remember the exact night that we were allowed to like declare that we wanted to sign up to learn an instrument, and I wanted to be with all of my friends who wanted to be drummers. None of them are drummers now. None of them even play a musical instrument. My mom forced me to play trumpet. And that, like, I played trumpet all throughout middle school, high school,
Okay.
college. I still play from time to time. It's given me opportunities, not just in like marching band and performing arts, but also like career opportunities. It's given me teaching opportunities, like all of that stuff. And like as you're saying that, I'm like, oh shoot, that was all the way literally back in fourth grade when like my mom pissed me off because I couldn't play
Yeah.
drums, but she forced me to play trumpet, and that's like the hinging thing that has led to like everything that I've done, and that like I still reference to this day, going around sales or content creation or like
Yeah.
gaming or whatever it is that I'm doing.
That's wild.
Hmm.
That's wild.
Just
Like
like this
you should
whole full
probably call
circle
your mom
moment.
and thank her if she's around. Be like,
Yeah,
thanks. Like
yeah. Maybe
that's,
maybe I'll call my mom after this and just say, "Hey, I was reminded of this. Thank you."
that's
And my
cool.
mom will definitely have the "I told you so, Christopher" type attitude. But don't tell her I said that. No. Yeah. No. That's a wild story. Now that I'm kind
Yeah.
of like drawing a lot of that together.
Isn't that what's fun? Like that's
Yeah.
the fun part about it all. Is like they're
Hmm.
like, oh, maybe there is something to that, or just how uncovering like a tiny thing about someone that feels relatively insignificant. It might you like that opportunity to learn something about yourself is always super fun. And then how and like seeing like how that through line plays out, but also like how you're learning about other people. Like it's so cool to know that about you. And then I feel like I want to now interview you and ask you several questions. We'll have to come back to about your
Yeah.
musical.
Yeah. We'll have to do like a part one, part two type thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now,
Turn the tables.
I don't want to get too far down the
Yeah.
road because I know that we're already off to a really good start. But I also kind of want to set the stage because I think that
Yeah.
it will help how we kind of carry forward the conversation
Yeah.
here. And I'd like to kind of take a step back and have you talk about yourself in terms of like what you do, what your roles are. And I think for anybody listening, hopefully they've already gotten the idea that, you are involved in sales, you are involved in sales leadership and stuff like that. But if you wouldn't mind sharing at least a little bit of like your background and your roles, I think that will help paint the total picture and then
Sure.
really give us a big springboard for moving forward.
So, as far as background goes, I've spent the last 17 years working in technology. I moved out from Kansas City or Kansas to Los Angeles to work in legal tech when I was 26. It was my first job out of college. Fun fact, it was the job that I got because my best friend, who I met at space camp when I was in seventh grade,
Okay.
ended up getting hired by this legal tech company out of college when she was at Georgia Tech. I was like fresh out of college, ready to spread my wings. And I was like, oh, sure, I'll interview with this company in LA. So moved from Kansas to Los Angeles when I was 26, worked in legal tech, ran client services, and like worked in, really understanding like what a startup was. That was my first experience at a startup. And then that ended up being the springboard for the entirety of my career. From there, I worked agency side where I did project management and client services, kind of working my way up. When that, it was really fun, like learning different skill sets. I learned that not only was I a people person and someone that was really passionate about like processes and account management and sales when I was in legal tech. Going agency side, I learned that I was a project manager as well, which was a certain interesting side of the brain to like understand like how to get organizational, how to organize other people. And I think then after that, I shifted. It was actually with the birth of my first child. I had met this incredible woman named Patty when we were both volunteering at an organization called Girls in Tech. And her and I ended up embarking on this journey where we were what you call in-house entrepreneurs. And were able to build out a company called Daily Karma. And at the time, this was almost 10 years ago, this idea of social impact and social giving was just an idea. People were starting to talk about it, like e-commerce was kind of coming of age a little bit. And so what we did was build technology that embedded directly into e-commerce websites and we facilitated what you call social giving, which is an aspect of corporate social responsibility.
Yeah.
So we built the plumbing, this really incredible app called Daily Karma, or did that for 8 years. Within the context of that company, I was the forward-facing side of the business, developing all of our partnerships, our sales strategy, even doing things like doing our HubSpot integration, like really into the weeds. I consider that time of our life. It was like it was our circus. Like we dug the holes that the tent poles went in. Like we were, and it was so fun to build a company literally from scratch. Like from this idea, and I remember like launching our first campaigns, going to Patty, my partner, and being like, hey, I have this idea on how we launch this platform. Let's focus it around maternal health. And so it was just so fun to do that. We did that for 8 years. And it was a joy. It was like arguably like a third child. So during that time, I had my first child. We had our second children together. And then we had this third child, which was our company.
Yeah.
And it was an incredible experience. And I think as a result, though, being so forward facing during what was some really intense years, during COVID and there was a lot of like social upheaval, I found that I got a little emotionally exhausted. Like my job was to not only sell our program and lead our team who was selling our program, but also I was consulting companies about like, okay, this horrible thing is going on. These are the nonprofits that you should support, or this is how you can utilize social giving and giving back to not only like build brand awareness and do good, but also do good for the business and talk about things like how it actually benefits ROI. Or how you can utilize social giving to engage with your customers a little bit more. So being on the forefront of that, I realized I had started to burn out. Like it was really, small kids building a business. And then like, it was hard for me to separate like the emotional side of it. Like, anytime something awful happened or good, but predominantly awful, because that's when people like rallying around something. I was like, I didn't want to give bullshit recommendations. I'd be like, okay, well, I would vet the nonprofits and have these discussions and have really hard conversations with some of our brands about even like, okay, cool, you're saying you want to support this, but if anybody were to dig 2 layers in, they're going to see that your board doesn't look like you really support diversity. So consider that. Anyway, so after doing that for almost 8 years, I just burn out. And I don't know that that's something that people talk about very openly, but I kind of reached a point where I was like, I found myself kind of numbing out, which wasn't good for my family. It wasn't good for my partnership with Patricia, Patty, who I love like a sister. I didn't feel like I was able to give my best to anybody. And so I took a step back and ended up shifting into corporate America, where now I lead a sales team, which is, I work for an e-commerce platform, and it's been really, I would say, kind of interesting in a way of like not being so emotionally tied, but still leveraging all of these skills from like project management to sales to leadership to, DEI, which is still very much a part of what I do on a day-to-day. So it's it's kind of culminated into where I am now, but without necessarily like the emotional like toll that it was taking. So Daily Karma's still around. They're great. I still talk to Patty every other day.
Yeah.
But it's been nice to kind of just like really hone in on like, okay, this is what it's like to be, you know, truly in sales and partnerships, truly sales management, and then to kind of be able to have emotional capacity to dive into other things like empathetic leadership, helping my teams with things like DEI. So that's a little bit about me. I also have 2 kids, 2 dogs, and a great husband, and I live in Ventura, California.
Man, that's quite the story. First off, the move from Kansas to LA could not have been easy, right? Like probably small town Kansas. I mean, there's probably not a whole lot of big towns in Kansas, aside from like
Kansas City's pretty big.
Maybe Kansas City, but like other than that, that transition could not have been easy. But man, what a springboard that was for you, right? Move to LA, and then you are going down all these different avenues and all these different ventures. And I think one of the things that I always find interesting when I talk to people in sales, right? A lot of people, this goes back to the initial conversation even. So there's so many people that I've talked to who will gravitate towards explaining who they are or talking about themselves with their accomplishments specifically in sales. But what I don't see from a lot of salespeople, and this may just be my own observation, is that there's not a lot of people who are talking about how they got there and the other skills that they've raked in over time that makes them who they are. Because you can train salespeople night and day, forwards and backwards, on like, this is how you make a cold call. This is how you send an email. This is how you craft a copy or how you approach a conversation. But it's like you stepping into that entrepreneurial world, you know, having passion for DEI and CSR and all of these other things probably make you pretty effective at what you do in corporate America. Whereas as somebody hired, you know, directly out of college or directly out of something, right? You could hire those people and train them and probably they could probably, you know, by KPI perspectives, hit the same things that you do. But you as a person, through your experiences, have so much more to offer because all of the other things that you're passionate about. And I don't think that that's shared enough. And there's not enough like personality in that. So at least from my own perspective, like there's a lot of salespeople who probably get a bad rap because there's no like humanization behind that. There's no like actual understanding. Nobody's sharing their 4th grade stories, right? Behind any of that stuff. And so that like hearing more about that from you, some of that stuff I already knew, but hearing about that journey just helps paint a much like greater and more detailed picture, you know, about who Melaney Lubey, who Mel is, right? At the end of the day.
Well, and it's fun to think about. Like, I think sometimes we think that careers are quite linear. Like, I am setting out to be a CMO. And if that's what people are after, that's great. But like when so my background, I have a degree in interpersonal and public communication, which really means nothing. I'm sorry. But like
it's a lot of words. Come on now.
It's a lot of words. But what I went to school to do which was what I was passionate about. I was always interested in people. Like my true north has always been I wanted to be a psychologist, but I got tired of college. But I'm always interested in like what made people tick, how our relationships intersect with things. And so that was always my through line and everything. But I just honed skills in different ways. Like it's account management, but you're utilizing, like, I think it's like interest in people and sales. I love salespeople. Like they're driven and like we want to win. And like sweet Patty, she would always be like, she'd call me a salesperson. I would get so pissed off at her. So I'm like, I'm not a salesperson. I'm a partnerships person. Mm-hmm. But like at the end of the day, it's like, it's what gives you that high. And how, I guess what I'm trying to say is like, that's a good indicator as to like where your strength is. But it also doesn't mean that you have to be on this like linear sales path. I think it's the idea of like, I've learned these skills, and you bring them in. Like if you are a good project manager and you're outgoing, then your sales cycle, like to get like real nerdy for a second, you're going to treat every single deal like a mini project. And so you're going to know exactly when to be following up. You're going to have a clear path as far as like, what does it take to close? If you have been in account management, chances are you're real comfortable getting uncomfortable and having conversations about overcoming objections, like asking follow-up questions, like not taking no, or like turning an uncomfortable situation into a positive. So I think those are things that like I've also kind of had to come to terms with. Like I texted Patty like 3 days ago and was like, you know what? You're right. And I'm sorry for giving you such a rash of shit for all those years when you tried to tell me I was a salesperson, because I'm still a partnerships person, but like understanding that like I love that sensation of like what gives me that buzz is not only coaching my team, but like when I'm in the moment, when I'm in that pitch, it's like walking away and knowing that like we've not only done something really good for us, but like we've helped a partner to understand like the potential in something, and to seek that alignment is just, it's so cool when it works. And but you're utilizing like all of those skills. It's not like I didn't go to sales school. But there's a lot of people that I love, and I am constantly learning about like overcoming objections and different like outbound sales techniques and how to infuse personalization into it. Like there's a lot of methodologies, but ultimately it's like, anyway, I could talk about it for hours, clearly.
I always hold, kind of the opinion that everyone, no matter what their career is, just about everyone should go through some type of a small sales training course, or a small just kind of like people relationship course in some sort of manner, because, those two, in my opinion, are tied together. I think that's a pretty wide opinion as well. But like, I think there's so many aspects of sales that so many people should learn, and it doesn't matter what your actual profession is, right? Because there's so many different things that you can learn through sales about how to approach a conversation, or how to, the toughest one for me when I was starting was how to ask the right questions, or how to continue follow-up questions, kind of like you just said, right? And so that's always been my thing, is like, hey, you should learn about this stuff. I always preach this to like the content creators that I work with. It's like, you need to understand this. And it's not because you're trying, well, it is partially because you're trying to sell who you are as a persona, but it's also because like you're trying to appeal to an audience. Like you're trying to, put yourself out there, and you need to understand what that audience wants, like what problems you're solving for that audience. And you could be a teacher. You could be, I mean, hell, you could probably be an engineer and still take value in those skills because of what it does for you outside of selling at the end of the day.
Right. It's EQ. Like at the end of the day, I think a lot of it's like you're getting outside of your bubble, because sales, I would argue that sales isn't necessarily about who that person is. It's how you're interacting with people.
Bingo.
Right? Like it's not, nobody cares who I am, but it's how you feel when you're interacting with that person, and how that person creates space for you to share your pain points, or share like, I think so much. My partner's a therapist, my husband's a therapist, so we talk about creating space a lot. And it's weird when our jobs intersect. It's like, all right, you're creating space for connection. You're creating space to hear someone's pain points. It's so much of sales, honestly, I think, is like knowing when not to talk. Like,
you're not wrong.
Right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's not just sales. It's like how we engage. Like knowing not to talk is like a fundamental human skill.
And I mean, how many lessons have you been through where it's like, what's the cliche? Like the first person to talk loses the deal, or loses the sale, or whatever it is, right? And it's so many times when I've been on the phone with somebody, and it's, you kind of have to take a back seat and just sit back and wait for them to answer, because you want kind of that, let's call it awkward silence, or whatever it is, because you want them to think for themselves, or you don't want to make it seem like you're forcing them into an answer that you want to hear. There's so many aspects of that, like, and not just when to speak, how to speak, there's so many different aspects that you can take into account through your everyday life and your interactions with people. And you're right. You know, the better you feel when interacting with somebody, like just the better conversation you're going to have, the better relationship you're going to build, like all of that just spirals, for what you're doing. Out of curiosity, because there's so much that makes up who you are and so many skills that you've learned over the years, do you have like a favorite? I'm gonna kind of put you on the spot a little bit. Do you have like a favorite like portion of what you've done or what you currently do where you're like I love this. Like I could throw everything else out the window and just do this one thing, and I just would be satisfied with like a career path. Do you have anything like that?
That's so hard. So but no. So I am both blessed and suffer from wild ADHD. So I don't know that there's ever going to be a singular thing. I learned a long time ago. I think Elizabeth Gilbert might have coined this term that I'm a hummingbird. Like I get hyperfixated on things. I fall in love with them. I will do them. Like I will like
just
flutter
obsessive,
and
almost
obsessive about it. And then my interest will get like shifted. But then that thing that I was obsessed about always kind of carries over. Like when you look at my career, it's kind of that way. So my instinct, my answer to that question is like my favorite things I've ever done. I really love being a facilitator. So what I mean by that is like some of my favorite moments in my career at my current job have been when I was leading a sales team through like unblocking some objections, like where we were getting stuck. And I was, sitting on a desk on our onsite and like whiteboarding with them and like repeating back what I was hearing. That was super fun. But then my other favorite moment was when I don't know how or why we thought this was a good idea, but this kind of goes into like the fuck it mentality.
Yes.
So like I serve on my our team's DEI committee, and I ended up in a room last year talking to a room full of not my peers, but like people that were my bosses or like levels above me, and talking to them about empathetic leadership, specifically talking to them like, tell me your thoughts on vulnerability, and like unpacking some like really arguably uncomfortable conversations, and like talking to them about shame resilience and how vulnerability and trust are all kind of leading into empathy. I will take that moment away as one of like, and that opportunity to like guide and that's like when everything fires for me. It's like you're creating space, you're repeating, like you're teaching, but you're reflecting back. And I think those are my favorite moments, but I would argue that I have those moments even when I'm in a room and pitching with clients or like working through solutions. It's that same thing of like, okay, cool, I heard you say this. Let's figure out how this connects to what that person over there said. Or, hey, I heard you say this. Let's figure out how it connects to this pain point that you're having. Or like you mentioned this over there. Let's connect this back to a problem that we're having like at a systemic level about a perceived lack of empathy on a team. So I don't know how to create a career out of that, or maybe I have like inadvertently. Right. But yeah, I don't. No one's ever asked me that question, especially on a podcast. But that's my honest answer. It's like, however, I can keep doing those things. Like that's when I'm happiest. It's fun to be on stage. It's fun to sell. But it's like, how do you connect points and like connect people and connect ideas?
I'm close with a lot of people. I mean, this is more, I draw a lot of parallels with like content creation and stuff like that, but it's like, I'm starting to thread the needle on this entire conversation because it started with the whole fourth grade thing, right? And, it's talking about where like our initial experiences are, but like, you think about college, for example, right? You go to school, you're in college, and for probably, I'd say a majority of people, they probably like, I want to go to college and I want to do this, right? Like, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to get my degree. I'm going to learn these things. And then like, this is what I really want to do, and then you start going down the road and you're like, okay, well, I enjoy pieces of this, but I'd rather do pieces of this. And it's like almost like a shopping cart, right? Like you want to make a meal, but you're picking out your ingredients as you go along the way for your career. And like, just like you said, right, the position that whether there's a position out there that exists that like, somebody's hiring specifically for that combination of things, or you've created it for yourself, right? You've made yourself, again, using cliches, you've made yourself unique in that regard to where it's like, you are capable of doing all of these different things. Sales may be, let's call it a foundation at this point, or it may be one of the pillars you operate on, but it's like, how many people can sit in a room and talk about empathetic leadership to a bunch of, let's call it, other sales folks, and like how many people can not only effectively talk about that and lead a conversation around that, but how many of those other people that you're presenting to have even said the words empathetic leadership in their lifetime before, right? And so I always find it very interesting because I feel like I'm hearing about it more and more about my colleagues or my friends or whomever who are going down this path of making their own positions that 20, 30, I mean, hell, even 5 years ago may not have existed. And so I think it's a rare, it's less of a rare breed now, but it was still kind of a rare breed when you can put a lot of those puzzle pieces together and say like, this is who I am and this is what I want to do, or the aspects of what I can bring to a position should a company want to hire me, or should I want to start a company.
And I think it allows us to be curious, like more than anything, like and I know we're butting up on time, but like that idea of like really not being afraid to just do the thing that interests you, or try it out. Or I don't know that I've gotten permission to do a lot of things in my career. Like it's been like,
I feel that
this idea.
Yeah.
Like, what if we just did it?
Yeah.
Or what if we just tried it? And then and we might fail, and that's okay. But I think that idea of like not being afraid to like lean into the things that excite you. I always think about like, to me, excitement is like things that light me up, or like I feel it in my hands. I feel it in like those types of things. If you're not getting those moments regularly, then like reconsider what you're doing. And for me, like my career is so intertwined with who I am, and maybe that's not a good thing some days, but like I want to be able to bring all of myself into everything I do. And so it's like, those are the things that make me tick, and ultimately have allowed me to do some really cool stuff, So
yeah. And again,
it's talk about it like that, but it's true.
Right. And again, I think I don't see a lot of people talking about that, or like opening up about that kind of journey and explaining who they are. Because then again, it ties back to like, this conversation just between you and I, for example, is a lot easier because like you understand more about me, I understand more about you. But it's like, if we had just approached this right off of the street and started diving into, well, like, what's your favorite sales technique, Mel? Or like, how do you approach this problem or this conversation like that? That may be exciting to some people, and I'm not taking that away or vilifying that whatsoever. But like digging into the weeds of what makes a person tick and peeling back the onion layer, like that's way more of an exciting conversation for me, especially if I'm getting to know somebody, or if I'm going to do business with somebody, or, whatever the case may be. So like, I think that these are all important aspects to just sales in general, marketing in general, empathetic leadership in general, right? Like these are all important aspects to it, because at the end of the day, and somebody said this on the last podcast, like sales techniques may change, the way that you do sales, like the technology may change, but like at the end of the day, it is still a people game. It is still a people skill. If you do not have that, it will be very tough for you to find success in this.
Yes, exactly. There's the human aspect that you cannot ever forget.
Yeah. Exactly. And I know, to kind of start rounding some stuff up here, because I know we are kind of coming up on time. I know that this is not like a typical podcast format that we would do. Normally, for all the listeners out there, they would sit down and listen, and I would go through a little bit more like strategically planned questions and stuff like that. But I think going off the rails like we did today is still leaps and bounds worth it, because it opens up to like a different side of things that maybe people don't talk about as much, or maybe at least like maybe people think about it. I don't know. I could be completely horse blinded to this at this point, but like maybe people think about it, but they just don't like vocalize it or bring it up or anything like that. But I think it at the end of the day, it's all still really, really important to what we do within our respective positions.
Yeah, I certainly, and I appreciate you going off the rails with me, and I'm happy we can always have a part 2 where we dive into all of those other things, but
get more structured.
Yeah, we need new structure, but it was also really fun, like to just take a leap and just be like, where is this going to take us today? Yep. Like, I don't think we talked through any of the questions that we had originally discussed, which I think is super fun, actually. Like, I'm kind of pleased. I'm tickled by that.
Yeah. And I definitely don't ever plan to sit down and make these like interviews, right? Like, tell me about a time, go through the old questions of like, tell me about a time when this made you feel excited. Like, we're not going to sit here and do that. I don't ever really plan on doing anything like that. But, I think if we could, to kind of wrap it up, like if you had like one main takeaway, or if you had like one main thing for somebody who is either currently in sales, maybe somebody who's looking to get into sales, if you had like a bit of wisdom to impart upon those people, like what would you say? Like how would you lead those people in the right direction in your opinion?
That's a great question. I feel like I started by cracking a joke, be like, always be closing, which I would never actually say. But like, I felt like I had to, but I think in reality for me, everything, do not forget the power in asking questions.
I love that.
Do not forget the incredible gift it is to offer reflective listening. And also don't be afraid to take up space. And I think space doesn't mean being the person that talks the most. Sometimes space can be like true, like that we talk about executive presence. It's like just not being afraid to just sit there comfortably and listen. Like sometimes I see it with newer sales folks all the time, like will bombard. But there's a lot of power in like well-timed silence and we forget like the power in asking a good question, which kind of goes back to like everything that we talked about today. We went off the rails because we started asking each other questions, and like, what an incredible, it was so fun. I haven't had this much fun like all week, like at work.
Mission success then.
Right. So I think that is like, and also just not to be afraid. I think we do a lot of things out of fear, but like if we can just center on like not being afraid to ask questions, being okay taking up space, and knowing that space sometimes is like being silent, makes for some really productive sales conversations and reflective listening.
I love that. It's a good little mantra. We'll have to write that down. No, and I think that's a great way to tie some things off here. And like we said, we'll definitely have to have a part 2 where maybe we dig into a little bit more of like let's call it the professional side, right? Because I think you hinted at the beginning on some things about like how you respond to people, getting into like reading your LinkedIn or reading like a little bit about who you are and what you do, instead of just saying like, hey, are you interested in, cleaning services? It's like, no, I work for an e-commerce platform. Like I literally don't have an office. You know what I mean? Like learning more about that, there's probably a lot more that we can dig into. So
yeah,
we'll definitely have to stay tuned for a part 2. But for the time today, Mel, thank you so much. This was an exciting conversation. Definitely a lot of fun. And like we've said, off the rails from what we would normally do on here. But I think that this shows, a little bit more of a, let's call it like a lighthearted, but also on topic or within topic, kind of conversation around, the different things that make up who salespeople are at the end of the day, and who, in your case, entrepreneurs are, and things like that. So, all of that to say thank you for the conversation today. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. And it was really lovely spending time with you, Chris.
Shout out once again to Mel for spending some time with us on this Fireside Chat. I had such a blast talking to Mel and doing something a little bit different with this podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed it as well. If you have a favorite part that you enjoyed, feel free to leave a comment down below and let us know your thoughts on this chat with Mel. Be sure to like the video, consider hitting that subscribe button, and turn on the notifications so you can be alerted when future chats go live on our channel. Thanks for listening, and as always, happy hunting.